We are here with a great, very experienced guest from the global scale of Walmart to the founder led passion of The Body Shop. Today's guest has led finance and strategy across the entire business spectrum. And now, as recent Kentucky's Startup Mentor of the Year, he's made it his mission to teach the next generation how to do the same. Please welcome David Hasler. David, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Aaron. Thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be great.
Yes, yeah, it will. So for those who don't know, I've had the opportunity and privilege to get to know David here over the past several years, and his wife Holly. Just, I think the world of you guys, and I think your experience and what you've done in so many different arenas here on the finance and business development side is just incredible. So we're gonna have a great discussion, a lot of fun stuff to get into. But first, couple of quick icebreakers. So David, if I were to pay you a good enough size sum of money that would make it worth it for an entire day, would you rather wear bell-bottom pants or sport a mohawk?
Probably the Mohawk.
Really? That's a
Yeah,
surprise. Okay.
yeah. I'd give it
Nice.
a go. Yeah, depending on the
Just
sum of money.
yeah. Just for the heck of it. Okay, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. To be honest, I might do the same. I really hate bell bottoms. So yeah, I don't know if that would work. If you were to envision what the playlist, like stuck in a loop on repeat, is of songs being played in hell, what do you think two or three of those songs might be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you ever watched The Walking Dead. There's that one episode where they had him sort of locked up, one of the guys, Daryl Dixon, locked up in a room. They were playing some
Okay.
children's song over and over again. That would be part of it, I bet.
Yeah.
Probably some combination of ABBA and a couple other things, more than likely.
Wow, that cuts deep. ABBA is that's one of my top bands actually of all time. We got to say, wow. Oh
Well, my
man,
wife
I'll have
loves
to.
ABBA. It's on all the time, and I'm like, okay.
Okay, you've just heard it too much. So that's okay. That's fair. That's fair. I was in a real sometime last year in a real ABBA phase, and we were playing it all the time. My wife was the same way. She was like, "Okay, we gotta shut this off if I hear any more of this." So that makes sense. Anything that's on repeat long enough. All right. And then lastly, what do you think the most adventurous thing that you've done in the last year would be?
The last year, oh man, I don't know if I've done anything super adventurous. I mean, I've spun up a high school pitch competition here in
That's right. Okay.
Kentucky.
Yep.
Just stuck myself out there and said, you know what, we kind of need something like this. So I got a little pilot going this year with Fayette County
Love
Public
it.
Schools and trying to scale it to the state over the next 2 or 3 years, see if we can get, some sort of fiber cross like thing going so we can
Yeah.
get entrepreneurship farther down into the educational system.
Love it. That's awesome. I think that qualifies quite well. Awesome. All right. Well, David, like I said early on, we have a ton of things we can explore. You have quite a rich experience and some pretty cool stories. I kind of want to start off, I think, with early on when you were working with Procter and Gamble, and you can give as much background as you want, you think is fitting here. But my understanding, one of the things they wanted you to do early with Procter & Gamble was go into a plant that they were looking to shut down, right? And tell me, give us a little bit more detail on that. Was the idea, first of all, that leadership was already planning to shut it down, and you were kind of like, hey, David, if you can turn the ship around, we'll keep it? Or was it just, defray as many costs as possible before we are definitely going to do this? Like, kind of what was the mindset going into it? And then maybe what are the first couple of things that you did once you got there in order to keep that from being the case? Because the end result was pretty positive, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, tell me about what was the mindset going into it? How did they set you up before you got there?
Yeah, so it was my second assignment at P&G. Back then, Procter and Gamble was really good about having assignments sort of mapped out, almost like going to college. So this was going to
Mm-hmm.
be my plant or cost assignment, and they were sending me out to a Sunny Delight plant in Plymouth, Indiana, middle of nowhere. And they literally pulled me aside before I was to sort of transfer out there and said, "Hey, we're going to close this plant down in a couple of years. Don't
Hmm.
be a hero. Just
Okay.
land the plane, right? Keep things under control. We're going to do some consolidations, and this plant's just not performing very well." So I got to the locations, been there about a couple of weeks, and the plant manager, this guy named Dwayne Carver, hard charging plant manager type, mustache and a whole sort of Top Gun kind of look. And he
Okay.
pulls me aside. He says, "Hey, I know why they sent you here, and we're not going to close this plant. You're going to help me fix it."
Nice.
And I said, "Oh, Okay. So I got on the phone and said, "Hey, boss, guess what? That's what the plant manager told me." And he said, "You know what? Give it a shot. Like, see what he's got. You can't really sort of make it any worse than it is now." And so I said, "Okay, well, let's try it." So I started digging in, working first, second, third shift, hair nets, steel-toed shoes, working on the blending platforms, the warehouse, whatever I needed to do to try to figure out how that process worked. I ended up taking the entire manufacturing system and recreating it in a series of Excel spreadsheets and Access databases to see if I could replicate what should have happened mathematically and then compared it to what was happening to figure out where the losses were. And they were everywhere. It was just crazy. There were just silly things that were going on, what we call paper losses. So one
Hmm.
example was we would get bottles in the backside of this plant to pack out Sunny Delight, just HDPE bottles. And of course, the amount that would come in from the manufacturer wasn't the exact amount we'd use. We had nowhere to store them, so we would send the excess bottles back. Well, nobody was
Hmm.
ever asking for a credit on the bottles that got shipped back. They were just
Oh,
shipping them back,
wow.
right?
Wow.
And so
Oh
we were paying for
gosh.
the same bottles over and over again to the tune of like it was like $800,000 worth of bottles that we had paid for, like doing that.
Wow.
But then there were just other stuff where equipment wasn't set up right and, was measuring things the wrong way and, found out the computer systems weren't really designed to measure what was called a density factor. So we were making different flavors of Sunny Delight. They all had different weights, molecular weights based on the ingredients, but they only treated them like one flavor, just like the standard orange, which is a very different weight than like the grape or the diet. And so it was
Yeah.
measuring things
Okay.
wrong because of that factor was hard coded in the computer. So once I figured that out, I was like, hey, come on, we gotta fix that because we're just like wasting juice and pushing it down the tube. So just things
Jeez.
like that. It was really an interesting learning process.
That is okay. So it sounds like, yeah, the original idea when they sent you was, hey, we're gonna let this go. Yeah, let's just try to, recoup what we can on the way out. But if you're it's neat that you didn't have to try and be the hero the whole time secretly. If you were able to have that conversation, be like, hey, I think we have a shot here. And they at
Yeah.
least gave you the room to say, okay, well, do what you can. Let's see what happens. So, but my understanding, based on what I think I've heard you say in the past, was that particular facility became a model moving forward, right? So it's more than
Yeah.
not only is the plant not shut down, but we're also using this as a standard by which to judge other facilities, which I think is
Yeah.
pretty remarkable, right?
Yeah,
So,
we adopted something called TPM or total productive maintenance. And that's where you're sort of like mapping everything out. It's one of the models was everything has a place and everything in its place. And so we lived that to the hilt, and that included going in my office, the finance, director's office, and we had to put little blue tape around where the phone was supposed to go, and where the stapler was supposed to go, and where the tape was supposed to go, because that's what happened on the manufacturing floor. There were little boxes where everything had to be. So when it was missing, you could see it, right? I
yeah.
needed to adopt that culture, as silly as it would sound. When people came in my office, they needed to see I bought into TPM as well. So
Hmm.
I had to get little foam inserts for my drawer, make sure all my pencils were lined up just like the tools on the
Okay.
floor. But that was, yeah, it became a TPM training site for P&G, and even folks from other divisions like paper and laundry would come and see us.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it
Now,
was fun.
I'm curious on that event specifically. What was the process of creating that buy-in for everybody else? Right? You say it's like it seems kind of silly, right? To map all this stuff out. Like, do I really need a placement for my phone on my desk and for my coffee mug and all of these things? But yeah, like, it makes sense. Like if you're telling me as someone who operates, like, yeah, no, this is the model we're creating so that everybody's on the same page. Did the other people, like in other departments and around you in these offices, did they buy into that right away? Was there a little bit more convincing, or was it as readily understandable to them right out of the gate what you were doing? I'm curious because that's like, it sounds like that's a cultural thing, right? And that's a little different than mechanics.
Yeah, I think for the most part they did. I was one of the outliers in the manufacturing facility in that I reported to somebody else. I was there as sort of a dotted line kind of thing to the plant manager. There was one other individual, the HR person, who in a similar sort of boat, and then we had an IT guy that had sort of a similar setup. But we sort of all saw the utility of sort of being part of the team and having a cohesive process. And then The other thing was it was also very visual, the measurements we were doing. So we had poster boards going down the hallway towards the break room, and we each had our own poster board. So we all had sort of our equivalent way of sort of reporting out things that were meaningful to the area that we were measuring. So I had all my finance and cost stuff on a little, poster board in the hallway, just like everybody else did. So it looked uniform to the employees as well. So folks who were coming
Yeah.
in, working on the line, saw that all the managers were doing things the same way, that there were no exceptions, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, was that, I'm guessing if this was pretty early on, prior to P&G's divestiture of Hawaiian Punch, did that come after this event?
Yeah.
And if so, okay, walk us through a little bit on that, because obviously, if you're working on that with a corporation as large as P&G, because that's not nobody, this is a pretty sizable decision that's being made, right?
Yeah.
To sell off an entire brand, an entire asset. I'd love to hear about what your role was in that, and maybe what some of the motivations, what some of those things that were coming into play were. Because again, this is a huge decision. This is a big company. This is a big, like, everything about this is large. This isn't small potatoes. So
Yeah.
at that level, in a corporate scenario, when a selling off an asset of that size, what is the decision making process look like, and why would you want to do that? I guess, or some of the
Yeah.
early motivations.
No, it's a great question. Hawaiian Punch was probably the easiest of the food items to divest of because it was just so different than the things that P&G was good at.
Okay.
Myself and my direct report and our director, Terry List and Mark Koenig, people I worked for, we were sort of all on the same page and sort of come to the conclusion that we needed to have this conversation. And the reason was is from a strategic standpoint, when you look at what P&G is good at doing, they're good at selling things in big truckloads to people like Walmart and Kroger. So people who have parking lots the size of football fields, basically.
Yep.
And while some of that business existed for Hawaiian Punch in, you saw the big cans that we used to sell back in the day, but then some single serve in the sort of the grocery aisle for like kids juices, the majority of the money on Hawaiian Punch was actually made in the bottling network. So through Coke
Okay.
and Pepsi. So it was
Sure.
getting canned out by Coke and Pepsi packers. We were sort of at their whim because they controlled the market. And then the fountain business was a huge part of Hawaiian Punch's margin back then. And we even had less control over the fountains within the restaurants because then you're dealing with the Coke bottlers and then the Taco Bells on top of that. And so it's really just a discussion with the from a strategic standpoint to say, listen, we're never going to be number one or number two in this particular industry because there's no way we're going to get past Coke and Pepsi, and there's no
Sure.
way we're going to exert influence over the Taco Bells and the McDonald's of the world. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense for us to be in it. And then there was also a little quirky accounting thing where they had purchased it at a particular time where the book value of that brand name was actually worth more to them dead than alive. So they couldn't write it off or depreciate. So
Hmm.
by selling the asset, they could write that off and they would actually get a huge
Yeah.
sort of accounting
Sure.
benefit. So from a strategic standpoint, it just didn't make sense. And that was
Yeah.
once we had that conversation, it was easy for people to get their heads around. Even though it had great margins, it was just
Yeah.
never going to be a number one or number two brand.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna pivot here now a little bit into retail, because, like I said, you've done a lot of stuff. So I want to, if I can at least get through some surface level on a
Sure.
few different categories, I think it'd be really fun, just so our listeners can understand. I think everybody that knows you understands kind of the breadth of your experience, but maybe for those people that aren't local, getting to hear this is pretty neat. Tell us about going into retail. Obviously, this is a different market. This is a totally different category in a number of respects. What are, maybe just at a high level, the things about retail specifically that you ended up really enjoying and found rewarding over your manufacturing background prior to that?
Yeah, what I really liked about retail, got hooked on pretty quickly, was that you could make changes so quickly and see them play out within hours, even
Sure.
sometimes, at worst case the next day, sometimes that night, right? And that was really sort of a lot of fun because you could see things that needed to be fixed or things that need to be tried or promotions that weren't working, and you could pivot and sort of see them play out almost in real time the next day through the sales data.
Okay.
Where when you were at P&G, you were a truckload away from that, right? Although you had
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
access to data, you really didn't control the store or the message, right? You were sort of beholden to Walmart and Kroger to kind of do things for you.
Sure.
So I really
That's
loved that
interesting.
direct contact to the consumer. And then I loved working in the stores. Like we would go out and actually spend
Okay.
time working in the field, sort of learning how to, sell Bath and Body Works products or whatever it might be. And, as much as I was, not the core customer, it was still fun to sort of learn how to do all that.
Sure. Well, and it's kind of neat too because in like a grand arc. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. You're kind of telling the story of where you were and getting into the entrepreneurial community, right? And so, like at the tail end, when you're in entrepreneurship, it's all about communicating value, like 24/7. That's what you're doing. You're just communicating value. And so, going from manufacturing to retail, it's kind of like a midway stop on understanding the value of being able to sell in a way that communicates the value to the consumer, because all it is do we have value to you? If not, then you're not our customer, right? This is the wrong consumer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that you went that route to wind up now largely in the entrepreneurial space. I want to go to Walmart a little bit. You've described being part of a horde of finance people that were hired at Walmart. This is like mid 2000s. Is that right? First of all, describe that. What does that mean, and why was there a horde of finance being brought on for them? What was maybe that? What was, I guess, your biggest adjustment going from P&G into that culture at Walmart, and what were some of the differences there?
Yeah, no, it's great questions. What a lot of people don't look, Walmart looks great from the outside. I mean, you could have your qualms about how they market and how they pay people. It's a separate discussion, but from running a business standpoint, very, very well organized and done a lot of innovative things. What
Hmm.
a lot of people didn't realize up until about 2006, when myself and a bunch of my colleagues showed up, is that there really were no finance people embedded in their organization. So any typical structure like a P&G or a Kroger, really, you've got finance people aligned with the merchants, you've got finance people over in operations, you got finance people in logistics, you have finance people everywhere. And there are little pockets
Yeah.
of folks who are there to kind of help tell stories and solve problems when you don't have all the puzzle pieces, aside from the accounting stuff. Walmart didn't have any of that. It was
Hmm.
all run by
Okay.
the merchants and the store operations people. So they were their own CFOs and that kind of thing. And so they just weren't, that wasn't part of their culture. And when sales flattened out, a lady by the name of Robin Forbes was really influential in sort of bringing all of this. She said, listen, this is what finance people do. You're stuck. You don't have answers. We're trying to figure out how to get the business back online. You need this skill set. And literally, they were bringing in busloads of finance people. I was interviewing alongside other people, and
Wow.
we all got hired at the same time. It's kind of like being in a big MBA cohort. It was actually quite a lot of fun, and we still keep in
Okay.
contact today. And so we all were able to get together and talk about our all sort of our culture experiences of how we had to navigate this world of pickup trucks and people who weren't used to having finance guys around.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. Huh. So walk me through this idea of getting into and getting, I guess, acclimated to the idea of pitching, right? Whether that's an idea or whatnot, or strategy. That's what you've described as kind of being your starting place with Walmart is when you got into pitching.
Yeah,
What does that mean to somebody who is not directly selling to a consumer? If
yeah,
you're pitching an idea, right? You're in a project, you're part of a finance team, and talk about some of the pitches that you gave specifically during your time at Walmart that took off. What were they? How did you sell them? What was their impact there
yeah.
specifically?
Well, again, to coming in brand new with none of that infrastructure in place, you were having to pitch really mundane things of like, well, here's why we create a forecast model the way that we created, and here's why we want to do scenario analysis. You're going to sort of educate people. So we were pitching right out of the gate and having each of us having to sell within our business units why things needed to get done a certain way and why we needed to, you know, sort of come before the budgeting process and talk about strategy and put numbers to the strategy, not just words. But as I sort of got into it, it was a blessing in that we quickly got known for being able to sort of convince people is probably a strong word, but people got accustomed to us sort of coming up with ideas and really stretching them. So we oftentimes got opportunities to work on things that would have been non-finance related projects. And I think probably one of the funnest ones I did, I was working in international. A lot of people don't realize this, but for a while, Walmart was actually larger internationally than they were in the US in terms of store
Wow.
count.
Okay.
And
Huh.
it really surprised me because they ran all the countries like individual companies rather than sort of pull them together like you would think how
Okay.
Walmart US would be run.
Sure.
And so they were all out there trying to buy things individually, competing against each other with suppliers.
Wow.
And I thought that was really strange, right? Because they run them just like independent companies. And I said,
Yeah.
well, from a merchandising standpoint, why aren't we at least trying to buy together? And at the time, Doug McMillan was running, international. I talked to him and some other folks and said, hey, we should try to fix this. And I kept kind of bugging him and other people for a while. And finally, they just kind of said, okay, listen, Hasler, if you got time to work on this, go ask your finance leadership team if you can work on it, and we'll let you try something. I said, okay. So I went and got permission, and I teamed up with a buddy of mine named Bill Garrett, and we actually went after the toy industry. And we said, there's probably one thing that's probably somewhat similar across countries. Let's go try if we can sort of solve the toy thing. And my premise was, if you take it like a Matchbox car, they're all made in the same plant in Philippines. It's only made in
Sure.
one place in the globe. And my
Sure.
gut said that we were paying different prices for it.
Hmm.
I wasn't sure, but that was my gut because we were all buying them separately. So I set off on this path of like getting all the countries together, aligning up the toy merchants, going to the Hong Kong toy shows, going out to LA to talk to the Mattels of the world. And I did find out one that they all just welcomed the help. They were just really anxious to like do something together. So that was sort of the first win, the camaraderie that came about. But also that there was a little bit of cost savings. We were paying different prices for things once you took out the
Sure.
shipping and logistics pieces. But the third one, which really kind of surprised me, is that there were actually as many savings on the we call the testing side. So there were lots of safety tests that had to be done at these manufacturers, and we were doing them for every country. And so what we did is we said, well, that's kind of dumb. Why don't we just find the country
Hmm.
that's got the highest standards? We'll use
Sure.
that test, and then we'll just all share it.
Yep. Yep. That's crazy.
It was like a win I didn't expect, but it was just a lot of fun. I mean, going to the toy convention in Hong Kong every year is just a blast. Just toys
Yeah.
everywhere. And
Yeah.
then talking to people like Lego and Hasbro and Mattel is just a high in and of its own, just being able to see those guys and talk. But it was a lot of fun.
Sure. So it's interesting because what you're describing there in particular sound. I mean, how do I say this this might betray my ignorance. There are some problems that are really, really deeply introspective. You really got to think about it. You really got to sit there and you really got to play around and look at the numbers and run them 3 times and then say maybe it's here. And then there are some problems that seem a little bit more surface level. It's like, hey, why not this? I'm curious in your experience, particularly back then, were some of those, I don't want to say easy problems because I don't think any large problems are necessarily easy, but like not super complicated solutions. Was it a lack of, again, in Walmart's place of just not having a lot of finance people embedded within the structure? That was it a lot of that? It was just people just weren't looking at things often enough. Was it just a culture of this is how we've always done things? I'm just curious because whenever if it's like a super technical solution to a very technical problem, you can it's like okay, yeah, it just takes a while to get there, right? But on
Yep.
some problems, I think are a little bit easier, and it can be for a variety of reasons. Like I said, people are just used to doing it a certain way, or and that's just how the ship runs, and nobody
Yeah.
questions it. So, like in some of those less complicated solutions, what did you see was typically the roadblock for not having that figured out earlier on?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a good tie back to sort of entrepreneurship, sort of more
Hmm.
broadly, right? And then we talk about two types of theories in the stuff that we teach here. One of them is we call these ideas either come from creation theory or discovery theory. And so creation theory is I create something brand new, like the iPhone, like something that's like new technology. It's right straight out of the box. Nobody's thought of this before. Discovery theory is where you're watching the market, you're looking for gaps, and you see something somebody else doesn't see, and you create a solution to that pain point. Most entrepreneurship is discovery theory. A very small percentage of what we do is creation theory. And so that whole premise is really just banks on that concept you see in the book Zero to One, and that there's so many opportunities that are hidden out there, not by nature, he says in the book, but by the constructs that we place on ourselves, the limitations that we place on our eyes about how we see things. So sometimes it just takes another person to come in and see it from a different perspective and say, well, why do we do it that way? Right.
Sure.
And that some of the
Yeah.
greatest startups are just from people going, well, that's pretty dumb. Like, what? We need
Yep.
to fix that.
Yep. I think that's excellent. I was just talking to somebody at lunch today, and I said how a lot of people think that incredible sums of money are made by this brilliant idea, somebody has, just like sliced bread or something. And like there are those, they do show up
Yeah.
from time to time. But I think that they are less frequent than just, it's almost like getting the blinders off and being like, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. There's just a huge like open space here that no one's addressing because, well, we don't know why, but we'll just go to it. And it's
Yeah.
it's not nearly as wild, I think, a lot of times as people make it out to be. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
It's cool.
we call those pain points, right? You've heard that term
Yes.
before, right? To
Oh
identify
yeah.
those pain points. And probably my favorite pain point story is just with Cliff Bar. When you look at
Okay.
sort of how that got
Yep.
started, this guy was going on a 120-mile bike ride. He took 6 energy bars with him, the ones that, the sample, the versions out there. And he went through all the first 5 through his ride, and the 6th one, he said he couldn't even eat. It was so bad. Now you can imagine how hungry you'd be on a 120-mile bike ride
Sure.
and not eating the 6th energy bar because it was just that bad. And so that's a really good example of a pain point that somebody was just trying
Yeah.
to solve something as simple as coming up with an energy bar that wouldn't melt while you were sort of out in the heat.
Right. Right. And man, there's good stuff to be talked about on the Cliff Bar, particularly because you've got some good experience with that. I think if we can do a part 2 of this podcast, I'd want to get into some of the
Sure.
nitty gritty on that in particular, because again, got a lot of questions, a lot of stuff. I want to spend the last little bit talking a bit more about entrepreneurship, specifically what you've been doing over the last few years, what you're doing now at the University of Kentucky, and kind of where you see, you even said how, the pitch competition that you're working on for the high school realm. So yeah, just give us up to right now. We've heard a lot about your experience in the past. Talk to us about last couple of years through the rest of the decade. What does that look like for you? What are you the most excited about specifically in entrepreneurship? And yeah, I mean, why here, why now in that space as opposed to being back in finance, a high level in the corporate realm?
Yeah, I'd always thought at some point I would teach. I had experience as a young person. I could talk about this in the second episode where I went over to Japan for a trip and met the CEO of Fuji Xerox, and he behaved in a particular way that gave me sort of a belief that great leaders also need to be great teachers. And so I adopted that sort of mindset early on in my career and learned how to be as good a teacher as I was a good leader or a good developer of people. And so I always thought that at some point I'd like to teach and sort of give back and help young people sort of see the vision of the world that I saw in terms of the opportunity out there. But I never knew really exactly how I was going to make it land. So long story short, I end up back in Lexington for a job that doesn't pan out. Start a consulting business. I actually started it kicking and screaming. People were telling me, I was actually trying to find a traditional job again. They're like, hey, you should really start a consulting business. And I'm like,
There you
I
go.
don't want to do that. Those guys are so slimy, right? I don't want to be a consultant. But they had some good friends who kept pushing me. And then I ended up launching my business and more than replaced my income that I'd lost before. It was just a blast to be able to work
That's awesome.
with people that you wanted to work with on fun projects like kimchi manufacturers or whatever the heck it was that popped up, right? And so kind of got involved in the startup community here, learned a lot about what I had been doing, was very startup related in terms of pitching ideas to executives, and
Sure.
the mechanics were much the same, and enjoyed coaching teams and sort of being part of that development process. And then this opportunity popped up to be a full-time lecturer at the University of Kentucky. And I'm like, that's it. That's where I can
That's
pull it
so
all
cool.
together and sort of package all this stuff and share information with people in a constructive way.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Yeah, like I said, there's so much we I think have yet to get into. So if you're willing to do another episode, I would love to maybe even do an extended one and maybe kind of let our listeners know there are some specific topics we could get into regarding some of the things. I just think that the stuff that you've done, the level that you've done, is not just helpful for professionals, but again, in entrepreneurship you have to be thinking a lot further down the road than right now. In
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, the startup phase is hopefully relatively short. Like you don't want to be making no money for 4 years. Like at
Yeah.
some point, you got to break even. At some point, you got to get profitable. And for me, I want to be thinking of what does 5 years look like from now? Because if I'm not thinking of what the problems could be and how I can solve a problem in 5 years at that stage of growth, then I'm really not thinking ahead well enough, right? I can't always be thinking about today's problems that are I'm not even going to, remember existed if the company continues to scale. So that's what I appreciate about your background is you've handled these at a massive level. And so to be able to talk to people at the startup phase and say, hey, at year 6 and at year 12, here's some stuff that you want to keep on the
Yeah.
radar.
It's going to bite you in the ass.
It's going to come around. Yeah. Yeah. So there's all sorts of good stuff. But no, I really appreciate it. I want to just do a quick rapid fire, high level stuff. You can maybe shout out for advice to people listening. Maybe your favorite book just overall on business or strategy. I know that's a very broad topic, but one that you just feel fits in a lot of places.
The 2 short ones, I'll throw 2 in. The E-Myth, I think, is a really important one for a lot of entrepreneurs, just understanding that, hey, act like you're going to franchise this thing, document, be prepared for that growth. And then the other one's Purple Cow. So important to sort of read that one, and because you got to stand out in this sort of crazy world that we live in. We just actually walked students through the Purple Cow yesterday and today in my classes, talking about all the marketing techniques and examples out there. But those are 2 just gold standard, easy reads that you got to sort of get in your portfolio.
Love it. What's a piece of technology that you are the most optimistic about for small businesses, for startups right now?
Man, I tell you, I really love the AI components that are coming out. I actually use them in my classes. Instead of dancing around whether the students are using it or not, I've actually incorporated it in my class and actually make them do assignments using things like ChatGPT.
Sure. Yep.
One, to kind of see what they get back, because it is a little bit different based on their search history. But I want them to use those tools. I mean, I would have loved to have had ChatGPT when I was going to school. That would have made life a hell of a lot easier, right?
For sure. All right. Last thing, I'm curious, with all that you've done, looking back now, 2026, if you were able to go back and give one piece of advice to the David Hasler starting out at Procter & Gamble, right? Knowing what you know now, what do you think might be the most valuable thing you could have told yourself back then?
Well, man, it's not work harder, because people usually say that. I mean, I think I worked hard enough, but I think I could have built better relationships with people. Like I have a small group of people I've kept in contact with, but I felt like I probably could have done a better job of making my network larger, because there are times when I probably could have leveraged that for some help on projects or whatnot. But the ones I have sort of maintained a relationship with, I've gone to them many times for help. And so I can only think that if I had gotten that circle a little bit bigger, I probably could have solved some bigger problems. I don't know, but definitely make sure you got your personal board of directors together and make it as big as you can.
That's awesome. Well, David, I have really enjoyed having you on. I am very appreciative that you are willing to do it a second go. So listeners, stay tuned, because I want to maybe carve out some niche topics that we can get a little bit deeper in on a second go around, and maybe touch on some of the stuff we couldn't get to today. But man, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you so much, David, for jumping on here with us and sharing your wisdom. And what's the best way for people to get connected with you from here?
Primarily on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's the best way to find me.
Yep. We'll put a link in here to your profile. And well, brother, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me on.
Cheers, David. You bet.
Bye.